Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of the Ship It Show episode of the Ship It Show. I'm here with Colin Bodell, CTO of Groupon, starting a new role over there. And today we're going to be talking about how sharing language and sharing taxonomy and really clarifying what you mean by specific words and phrases helps transform an engineering organization or align an engineering organization behind a vision. You told me a great story the other day about, or just as we were talking coming in here, about how continuous build meant one thing to one person and one thing to another person. And in one case it was someone got an Outlook reminder on their computer, and that meant the engineer clicked build and the build scripts were done. And then to the other person that meant, well, when you check in, it gets built and deployed.
I mean, what you're categorizing is the notion of mental models. I started my new job, 3 weeks ago. It seems like a lifetime ago.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. And yeah, when you come in, to a new organization, whether it's a new company or whether it's a new organization, you have a set of mental models. I know what a project plan looks like. I know what an architectural diagram looks like. I know lots of things, but of course they're all personal to me. So when I come into a new organization and I say, I want to look at the architectural plan for X, and somebody says, sure, no problem, and they'll go off and they'll come back and bring it in 3 or 4 days later, the chances of it actually fitting my mental model are pretty much close to zero. I mean, there'll be a lot of the right words and there'll be some pictures and some diagrams in there, but I'm going to have a lot of questions and I'm going to have a lot of feedback. Establishing that shared mental model, sharing a mental model right at the beginning, and sometimes it can feel a little clumsy, it can feel a little foolish, saying, how do you define the word done? I've had engineers say to me, oh yeah, we're done. I'm like, great, what do the customers think about it? Well, no, we're done. We're code complete. That's what we mean by done. But we've still got to do, automated testing and user acceptance testing. We've got to do lots of other things going on. So the word done means different things. So if I sit down in a meeting and say, let's define the word done, it can, everybody looks at me like I'm a lunatic and I don't understand the English language. But nevertheless, those things are really important.
And I think with DevOps in particular, we talk about these 5 different stages with 15 different building blocks of capability for a team. That's really 15 opportunities for misunderstanding at the team level, and being intentional about what you mean when you're describing something, and not shortcutting it. Everyone's busy. And you can say, I want this to be launched with automated testing. Now, unless you take the time and the investment early on to kind of make sure that means the same thing to team A and team B, it's difficult.
Well, yeah, and if you look at 15 different things, combinations and permutations, that's 15 factorial. That almost guarantees that there'll be problems and issues, and you'll find out about it when you've got very little runway in which to resolve the problem. So yeah, even though it might be a little embarrassing coming into a new company and having to define things that people believe are very basic, it is nevertheless an incredibly important way of not guaranteeing success, but ensuring that you are minimizing risk.
And I think it's funny because the latest sort of wave of engineering with cloud and with DevOps and with all of these different technologies, in some respects, technology teams are now learning how to define requirements for themselves. And in a product, the product ecosystem and things like Agile and the product methodology and project management methodologies have for the longest time been struggling to make sure the requirements are clear, the acceptance criteria are clear, when you're done, here's the thing, this is it done. Done. You know when you're ready to ship. And that whole machine has been set up now to eliminate some of these communication problems. And I think engineering teams in the DevOps world are learning, and engineering leaders who are moving up into positions of leadership are learning that there's no difference between a requirement and the clarity that's needed from a product perspective and the clarity that's needed from an engineering investment perspective as well.
Yeah. Well, and the problem is compounded. Leaders that are developing I've started off working in a relatively small unit. Perhaps they've grown from being an engineer to being an engineering lead, and then it's been formalized as a manager. But as they grow their career, then they take on multiple units. And all of that expertise and experience they've developed and rapport and relationship and standardized nomenclature they've established within their single unit. Now, how do you cross-calibrate across multiple units? And then how do you cross-calibrate across multiple locations? I've got development offices or development locations in like 4 or 5 in North America, a bunch in Europe, and also in India. So there's a cultural overlay about all of that. So getting everybody calibrated on the same page and using words very, very specifically and in a particular manner is incredibly important.
And we've talked a lot about what I would call the peer and report relationship. As an engineering leader, I want to be specific about how I'm talking about things to my peers and the teams that I'm managing. You've got a lot of experience, of course, talking to boards, and in some cases that compounds the issue, because if you say continuous integration to a development team, they'll get to where you think you are, and you'll get to where you think are, and the gap will be fairly closed or easy to close. Mm-hmm. But when you're dealing with a board, or you're dealing with non-technical C-level, like how do you convince them that you need to invest in term, and like how you define those terms?
It's hard because a lot of members of boards are non-technical, and if you apply technology to technical terminology, it can be confusing. So you want to not simplify it. I mean, you're not talking down to them, but you've got to pick a language, again, a nomenclature that they're familiar with. But again, I'll take the time, when I'm in audit, board audit meetings or in full board meetings, to establish some terminology. And the classic that I run into time and time again, I look at projects as kind of being sort of 3 degrees of complexity. Number 1 is trivial. A 3-year-old child could do it. Typically we don't get many of those. Then the biggest chunk is straightforward. And I throw out the word straightforward like it's crazy. What straightforward means to me is somebody somewhere in the world has done it once before. There is a model, there is a pattern that we can adopt. Doesn't mean to say it's easy. Okay. And that's where I get tripped up. And of course, the final one is rocket science. And very few companies and organizations need to do much, if at all, any rocket science, certainly in the early days of their growth. As you get to a degree of sophistication, you may bring that in, but the biggest segment is straightforward. And I've sat in front of boards and said, this is, XYZ project is straightforward. And what they hear is, it's easy. And I have to catch myself and say, by the way, when I say straightforward, I mean somebody's done it before. It's not easy. It is a high degree of complexity, and there are elements of risk in there. But it is straightforward in the way that I apply the word. And if I don't catch myself and say that, it can lead to misunderstanding, miscommunication, and misexpectation, which certainly when you're dealing with the board of a public company can be a really bad thing.
That's probably not a good scenario.
Yeah.
Okay, so in closing, if you are if you're a new leader or a leader that's being brought into a situation who's got a lot of technical background and is bringing a lot of, I hesitate to say baggage, but bringing a lot of terms and phrases along with them and mental models in their head, what would be your advice for that first 3 weeks? How would you?
I think it's exhibit a lot of humility. Be prepared to have some folks look at you like, why is he defining these very simple terms? But take the time to define your terminology and ensure you're cross-calibrated across the organization. That will save you an incredible amount of pain and confusion and ambiguity in the future.
Thanks very much for taking the time, and pleasure having you on the Ship It Show.
Excellent.
I hope you'll come back again.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.